Imagine you're sitting outside, enjoying the breeze and sipping your favorite cold drink. Everything feels calm and peaceful. Then an old man approaches. He looks frail, thin, and worn out like someone who's barely taking care of himself. He offers you some freshly butchered meat to buy. Maybe you feel a little sympathy. Maybe you think, why not? He probably just needs a bit of money to get by. But then when you open the bag, instead of beef or lamb, you find a human head. This shocking case went viral across Indonesia. It was about a man who walked around his village selling meat from his wife's body. This is the story of Tarsum. Hey friends! So this might be a bit of an unexpected topic, especially if you come from an Asian background like I do, where talking about pleasure, especially for women, can feel uncomfortable or even shameful. But honestly, it shouldn't be. There is nothing wrong with wanting to feel good. It's natural, it's human, and actually one of the most empowering things you can do for yourself. So if you're ready to explore in a way that feels elevated and safe, LELO is the brand I personally trust. Their designs are gorgeous. The tech is next level and everything about the experience feels respectful and empowering and fun. And I've been using their products for years, and the newest one, a Sona 3 Cruise, it's honestly unlike anything else. It doesn't just vibrate, it pulses using sonic waves and stimulate both the surface and the deeper parts of the clitoris. And even with added pressure, it maintains its strength, giving that consistent intensity throughout the experience. No breaks in the moment, just a smooth, uninterrupted path to pleasure. And there is more. You can even sync it with the app and explore together with your partner using Love Bridge. So whether you're long distance or just want to spice things up, it makes intimacy feel fun, playful, and connected. Click the link below and use my code MEGAN15 for 15% off. You deserve this for you and for your relationship too. Highly recommend. Give it a try. It was Friday, May 3rd, 2024, a cold day in Cisuntrol, a small village in the Rancha district of Ciamis, West Java. Usually around this season, rain pours from early in the morning, and people stay home, bundled up, sipping something warm. But not that day. It wasn't raining, just chilly. The sun hadn't yet risen high, and most people stayed inside, except those who had to go to work. That included Yo-Yo Tarya, the local neighborhood chief. It was a weekday, so as usual, he was already preparing for work. Around 7:30 a.m., just as he was getting ready, he got a call from one of the neighbors. They said that Tarsum, the man known for butchering and selling sheep at the local market, had gone mad again. Yo-Yo thought maybe he had tried to harm himself like he'd done before. So he headed toward Tarsum's house to check on him. But before he got there, he spotted him standing near the village cemetery holding a bloodstained plastic bag. From a distance, Yo-Yo could hear him shouting, trying to sell meat. And that alone struck him as strange. Why would he be selling meat on foot right there when the market was just around the corner? Then Tarsum noticed Yo-Yo and started walking toward him, still gripping the bag. He smiled and asked, "Do you want to buy some meat, sir?" Still puzzled, Yo-Yo asked what kind of meat it was. And Tarsum replied, smiling, "It's Yanti's meat." Yanti was his wife. The answer hit Yo-Yo like a jolt of electricity. Without another word, he turned and ran. He sprinted to the nearest police station and didn't stop until he got there. Not long after, the police arrived in the village, and thankfully, they found Tarsum still nearby. But what they saw was beyond horrific. He was now dragging his wife's mutilated body parts into a neighbor's house. The story exploded across the internet. It was all anyone could talk about. What had happened in this quiet, peaceful village? Who was this man? And how could someone go so far as to dismember his own wife and try to sell her like meat at the market? His name was Tarsum. He was 50 years old, and not much is known about his background, or about Yanti, his wife, who was around 40. People who knew him described him as quiet, calm, and hardworking. He had moved to the village with his wife and 2 children around 2010. At the time of the murder, only their youngest child, who was still in school, lived with them. Tarsum made a living herding sheep. He owned a few sheep and goats, selling them live or butchering them and selling the meat at the local market. He also managed a small farm. Neighbors said he was good to his animals, fed him carefully, talked to them gently. He was known to be cheerful. He always greeted people with a smile and said things like, "Good morning," or "Have a nice day," whenever someone passed by. He didn't look like a man who would one day butcher his wife, but clearly, something had been building for a long time. Just like many others in his village, Tarsum didn't come from money. He had some livestock, but his house was small, modest, just enough to provide a roof over the heads of his wife, his 2 children, and himself. The animals he raised were more than just income. They were his only real treasure. Not much is known about what his wife Yanti did for work, but one thing stood out. Despite their hardships, the family made an effort to give back. Neighbors remembered them for helping others, doing small acts of charity, and showing up for the community when they could. As for Tarsum's extended family, they weren't nearby. He lived only with his wife and kids in the village. And in times of struggle, it seemed struggle was the only constant. Raising animals and scraping together a living in a small rural village is backbreaking work. Tarsum spent his days out in the fields, tending the farm and taking on manual labor jobs wherever he could, all just to put food on the table. But when prices of basic goods began to skyrocket, his livestock weren't ready to be sold yet, so he turned to neighbors for help. At first, it was small things, borrowing rice, sugar, eggs, essentials. But eventually, even asking for that became too painful. He was embarrassed. So he turned to loan sharks, people who would lend him money, no questions asked, at a price. When it was finally time to harvest and sell meat, he had hoped it would be enough to ease the burden, even just a little. But buyers were scarce. People in the village couldn't afford meat either. His income didn't improve, and so he borrowed again. Loan after loan until one day it all snowballed. By the time of the incident, investigators reported that Tarsum's total debt had reached 100 million rupiah, about $6,000. For a man with almost no income, it might as well have been a mountain. The weight was crushing. The cheerful, friendly man neighbors once knew began to change. His smiles faded. He kept to himself. He grew quiet, withdrawn. Still, behind closed doors, the cracks were becoming louder. People living next to his house said they often heard shouting from inside. Fights, arguments. Some even claimed they heard loud banging, possibly someone being hit. Yanti had reportedly reached out to both her family and Tarsum's, telling them she was worried about him. She said he wasn't the same, that something inside him seemed to be breaking. Their families assumed it was the pressure, the financial weight was eating away at him. And in Indonesian culture, the burden of providing for the family still overwhelmingly falls on the husband. The man is expected to be the breadwinner. And when that role becomes impossible to fulfill, shame, guilt, and stress begin to take root, sometimes quietly, sometimes violently. Yanti's family tried to get him help. They contacted the local community health center, asking if someone could assess his condition, see if he might be suffering from a mental health issue. To their credit, the health workers responded. A team, doctors, and staff visited Tarsum at home. They gently encouraged him to go in for a simple medical and psychological checkup. His family was hopeful. They thought this might be the turning point, and maybe finally they could get some answers. But after a full evaluation, the results came back normal. The health center couldn't find anything wrong, no clear signs of illness, physical or psychological. To them, he appeared stable. Still, they didn't leave him empty-handed. As a precaution, they prescribed medication for anxiety and depression, hoping it might help. For a while, things seemed to settle. Tarsum followed the doctor's instructions, took his medication, and there were no reports, no signs of violence, no unusual behavior. People began to hope that maybe this really was a mental health issue, that maybe with treatment, he was starting to heal. But then something shifted again. It began when a man showed up in the village. He was tall, broad-shouldered, someone with the build of a debt collector. He didn't look like someone just passing through. He looked like someone with a purpose. He started walking around asking villagers one question: "Where is Tarsum?" He didn't seem aggressive at first, just direct and focused. So some people pointed him in the right direction, toward Tarsum's house. But as he walked off, others couldn't help but feel uneasy. They started eavesdropping as he reached the home. They say the man didn't even call out for Tarsum. He just banged on the door and demanded the money, loudly. He even shouted the amount, 100 million rupiah. That was the first time many villagers realized just how deep Tarsum's debt had gone. The number was shocking. For someone who lived as modestly as Tarsum, it was hard to imagine. After a few minutes, with no response from inside, the man gave up and left. 3 days later, on the night of April 30th, 2024, Tarsum showed up at Yo-Yo's house, the neighborhood chief. There was no prior appointment, it wasn't a patrol night, and they hadn't planned to meet. So when Yo-Yo opened the door, he was surprised to see him. He invited him in, asked what brought him by. But Tarsum didn't answer. He just sat down, eyes fixed on the floor, not saying a word, no eye contact. He was just silent. And then finally he spoke. Just one sentence: "Please take care of my youngest." Yo-Yo froze. The words hung in the air like a warning bell. He asked what he meant by that. Why would he say something like that? Was something wrong? But all Tarsum offered was a faint smile. "I'm okay," he said. "I might go to Kalimantan." He explained that a friend in Kalimantan had offered him work, help building a fish farm. Maybe it would give him a fresh start. Maybe things would get better. It sounded hopeful, but Yo-Yo felt something wasn't right. There was a heaviness in Tarsum's voice, a look in his eyes he couldn't shake. So he pushed a little, asked again if anything was going on. Was there trouble at home? Was something wrong between him and Yanti? But Tarsum just shook his head and kept saying everything was fine. Later, after the incident, Yo-Yo would learn that Tarsum had visited several homes in the village that night, but not to say goodbye, not to talk about his youngest child. He asked them to come to his house, told them to stop by around 7 p.m., said he needed help with something. Yo-Yo's instinct wouldn't let him rest. He decided to go check on Tarsum anyway. When he got close to the house, he didn't find peace or a warm welcome. Instead, he heard a woman screaming, then loud banging from inside. He rushed in, along with a few other villagers, and what they saw chilled them to the core. Tarsum was on the floor, his own hands wrapped tightly around his neck, trying to choke himself. His face was turning red, his breath shallow, and his body was shaking. Yanti was right beside him, fighting to pry his hands away, desperately trying to stop him from killing himself. If she hadn't been there, if the neighbors hadn't come in time, he might have succeeded. They almost had him, but just when they thought he calmed down, Tarsum broke free once again, and this time he turned violent toward himself. He ran headfirst into one of the wooden pillars inside his home. The sound was sickening. Blood started to pour from his head, but he didn't stop. Staggering out of the house, he slammed his skull against a metal electricity pole. Then, against the neighbor's brick wall, he dunked his head into a rainwater basket and held it there. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he threw himself against the nearest coconut tree. It was chaos. Villagers came running. More and more people joined Yo-Yo in trying to restrain him. Only after several men got hold of him did Tarsum finally stop. They brought him home, and his breathing was erratic. His face was drenched in water, blood, and mud, but he was alive. Then they looked at the wound and realized it was worse than they thought, so they rushed him to a doctor. Later that day, once things had calmed down a bit, Yo-Yo sat down with Yanti. He needed answers. What had happened? Why had Tarsum exploded like that? Yanti told him that earlier that morning, Tarsum had suddenly gone into a rage. No warning. He had thrown things around the house, attacked her, and eventually tried to choke himself in front of her. When Yo-Yo asked about the rumors about the enormous debt and the debt collector, Yanti admitted she had heard the same, but Tarsum had insisted everything was under control. He told her he'd already sold his car and paid off most of the major loans. There were a few smaller ones here and there, but his family was helping manage those. And during all of this, as if none of it had happened, Tarsum was calm. He smoked a cigar like usual, smiled, laughed a little, just like that. Back to normal. But that normal didn't last. Fast forward to Friday morning, May 3rd, 2024. In the village, days start early. By 3 a.m., people are already headed to the market, preparing their stalls or shopping for the day. Around 7:30 a.m., Yanti was getting ready to go to the mosque. She had been learning to read the Quran there, and it gave her a chance to connect with other women in the community. But she never made it. Just as she stepped onto the road near their home, Tarsum attacked her. He was waiting. With a large wooden stick in his hands, he struck her hard, and then again and again. Most of the blows landed on her head. Her skull shattered, blood splattered across the road, the ground, even on Tarsum himself. Her bones cracked under the weight of each hit. And when she collapsed, bleeding from her mouth, her ears, and head, you might think that was the end of it. But it wasn't. Instead of walking away, Tarsum went back to the house. And this time he came out with a kitchen knife. He stood over Yanti's body for a moment, then sat down beside her and began to cut. First her legs, then her arms, then again leg, arm, until every limb was severed from her torso. Then he split her body in half. All the parts, her limbs, her head, her torso, were stuffed into a large plastic bag, the same kind he used when preparing and selling sheep meat at the market. And then he got dressed, just like any other market day. Only this time, instead of heading toward the market, he strolled through the neighborhood, asking people if they wanted to buy meat. One neighbor heard him shouting, "Come and buy Yanti's meat." At first, no one could process what that meant. But one man, alarmed by the tone of Tarsum's voice and the bag in his hand, called Yo-Yo. At first, Yo-Yo assumed it was just another episode. Maybe Tarsum had hit Yanti again. Maybe it was like last time. But when he saw the blood and the bag and the calm in Tarsum's eyes, he knew. This time was different. Yanti was gone. He didn't wait. He ran full speed to the nearest police station. And he left Tarsum standing there, near the village cemetery, alone with the bag still in his hands. Not long after Yo-Yo ran to the police, another villager spotted Tarsum again. This time, he was squatting near a post ronda, a neighborhood watch post where local men usually gather at night. He wasn't just sitting there, he was cutting something. The man walked closer, curious at first, until he saw what was in Tarsum's hands. A human leg. In one hand, Tarsum held the leg, in the other a knife. He was calmly slicing the limb into smaller pieces, like it was just another animal he'd butchered. The man froze, his heart dropped. Then someone screamed, and in moments, the village erupted. People came running, others started recording on their phones, and when Tarsum realized he was being watched, he didn't try to run. He simply dragged the body parts toward a nearby house, leaving a trail of blood behind him. It wasn't long before the police arrived, but even then, his arrest wasn't easy. Tarsum still had the knife in his hand. He waved it at anyone who came close, ready to fight. In one now viral video, a member of the Indonesian military is seen wrestling with Tarsum, trying to pin him down. In an interview, the officer later said, "I might have lost my life if he'd overpowered me." Even as people grabbed him, Tarsum screamed, scratched, tried to wriggle free like an animal cornered. Eventually, with no other choice, they dragged him across the village and forced him into a police vehicle. Tarsum was taken to the Chiamis District Police Station for questioning. At first, no one could get through to him. He wouldn't make eye contact. He cried, sobbed, sat alone in his cell asking over and over, "Where is my wife?" He drifted in and out, sometimes just staring blankly through the bars as if he were waiting for a punishment he couldn't even process. But slowly, he began to speak. During one of the early interrogations, he broke down in tears before answering any questions. Investigators finally got a clear picture of what had happened. According to Tarsum, it all began with an argument. They were talking about money, debt, pressure, and something inside him snapped. He admitted to killing Yanti. On May 5th, 2024, police formally charged him as the sole perpetrator under Articles 338 and 340 of the Indonesian Criminal Code, premeditated murder, punishable by life in prison or even death. But during his time in detention, police noticed his behavior changing rapidly. One moment calm, the next agitated. He would hit his head against the wall, bang it against bars. His moods swung like a pendulum. Out of concern, investigators requested a full psychiatric evaluation. He spent 14 days in the psychiatric ward, and afterward, doctors concluded that Tarsum had a mental disorder, severe enough that he couldn't be held criminally responsible. He was released from criminal charges. Instead, on September 4th, 2024, he was transferred to Marzoek Imadi Hospital in Bogor, a mental health facility for long-term treatment. His condition reportedly improved, but when word got out that Tarsum might eventually return to the village, the community was firmly against it. In the end, authorities made the decision to transfer him again, this time to Sentra Fala Martha, a rehabilitation center in Sukabumi on September 20th, 2024. There were whispers that after rehab, Tarsum might be moved to a social welfare facility for people with psychiatric disabilities. But beyond that, his trail went cold. His current whereabouts are unknown. Videos of that day, of Tarsum walking around with Yanti's body parts in hand, spread quickly across Indonesia. The case shocked the nation. But as the public reacted to the horror of it all, 2 innocent children were left behind. Children who now had to live with the label, the murderer's kids. They moved in with relatives trying to start over, trying to forget. But in a village where everyone knows everyone, moving on isn't easy. Their lives would never be the same. And still, people talk about Tarsum. Some see a cold-blooded killer. Others see a man who needed help, who cried out in pain long before the crime, but no one really listened. So how did this happen? His family actually did the right thing. They contacted the local health center. A team came to his home. They gently persuaded him to get examined, and he did. But the results came back normal. Because in many rural areas, mental health screenings are limited in scope. Clinics are understaffed. Doctors may not have specialized psychiatric training. And unless someone is showing severe psychotic symptoms right in front of them, many issues like depression, paranoia, or personality disorders go unnoticed or unrecorded. Add to that the cultural pressure. In communities like this, men are expected to be stoic, quiet, and resilient. The idea that financial stress or emotional breakdowns could be medical issues just isn't widely accepted. And so, warning signs are missed. Outbursts are seen as bad temper. Withdrawal is mistaken for tiredness. Strange behavior gets brushed aside until it's too late. So this case again shows how untreated mental illness, poverty, and social stigma can lead to tragedy. So what do you think? Was this a story of evil, or was it a breakdown of one man and the system around him? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story made you reflect, even for a moment, check in on someone around you, because sometimes the people who need help the most don't know how to ask. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.